Hello. A new day, a new modeling video. So, in this video, I'll be doing a request made by this account. The design I'll be modeling is this pink hair character. Now, I decided to model this character because, well, I didn't really have any plans after my last model, but also because this character had a skin-tight outfit, which meant I could continue to practice sculpting anatomy. So, with the introduction done, let's begin. So to start, I opened Blender and I started blocking out basic shapes. Now, the reference I was using for the base sculpt was this Sketchfab model, and unfortunately there was no download option. Now, I could have just used the reference from my last video, but I was worried that if I kept using the same reference over and over, it would cause a bias to form in my art. So even though it was a little annoying using the Sketchfab viewport, I decided it was worth the trade-off. So after finishing blocking out the shapes, I merged them together using the remesh tool and began smoothing out the character and adding details. And after an hour, I decided to stop, take a step back and evaluate my progress. And I can't say I was too impressed. But I brushed it off as a warm-up and decided to start again. So I restarted the blend file and started blocking out my character again. This time though, I chose to spend more time in the blocking phase before using the remesh tool. After that was done, just like before, I merged the parts together, sculpted in some extra details, and finally I evaluated my masterpiece. My masterful piece of garbage, that is, because oh my god, it looked terrible. Comparing it to my last project, it was noticeably worse, and honestly I wasn't really sure why. Eventually I concluded that the shapes in my new reference were too subtle, and I needed to switch my reference to something that was more simpler but had more exaggerated shapes so I could actually see what I was trying to model. So I switched my reference to the stylized model instead and decided to press on. So I gave the character a basic rig and posed it to the concept art. After that was done, I added a camera and resumed sculpting the character. While sculpting, I made sure to add each adjustment as a shape key. This meant after making a change, I could quickly toggle the adjustment on and off to see if it actually made an improvement to the sculpt or not. After sculpting for a while, I started to run into some topology issues with the arms and armpits. The area around the armpits were especially bad. The mesh was getting way too stretched out, but I couldn't use the remesh tool without wrecking the rig. But since I knew this character was going to have flat lighting, I didn't think that this would really be that much of an issue later on. So I decided to use the age-old technique of not giving a fuck and I moved on. Now, not much time later, the mesh started to look a lot better, so I decided to start on the head. Now for the head, I used the one from my Utah project. Now if you haven't seen that video, here's a speed run of how that went down. Okay, so now that we're up to date with how we got here, let's continue. So I adjusted the eyes, opening them and matching them to the reference. I then duplicated part of the face mesh and separated it as its own object, and then created the eyelashes from that separated mesh. I then divided the cube and used it as an eye. I yanked the face upwards, made the nose even more pointy, made some ears and eyebrows, and then finally I applied a mirror modifier to everything to give symmetry back to the mesh. With the face mesh basically done, it was time to do the hair. To make the hair, I just did what I normally do, and I just added a curve object and applied a bevel modifier to it. I then blocked out the hair, which was probably one of the easiest hairs I've had to block out, since the style is extremely simplified. So with the head done, I puffed out the cheeks a bit and then imported the head to the main scene. With the body in a satisfactory state, it was time to start on the clothes. To create the collar, I added a torus, deleted half of it, filled the hose, and then moved it into place. After fixing up its shape, I started on the jacket. To create the jacket, I added a plane, snapped it over the body, and then extruded the edges down along the front and the back. I then duplicated the mesh, flipped it over, and then fit it to the body. To create the bottom part of the jacket, I added a cube with a bevel modifier, and basically did what I just did with the collar. After that was done, I added a thickness modifier to the jacket, made a couple of pockets from some subdivided planes, and then after a few more adjustments, the jacket was finally done. The next thing I did was the shoes. Now, with the shoes, I wasn't exactly planning on rendering or texturing them, so I was pretty lazy with creating them, to the point where I'm not even going to bother explaining how I made them. I basically just threw some shapes together. So here's some peek pics and let's move on. Now, the next items to check off the list were the braces and the thorns. Now, once again, this was fairly basic to do. Literally just some cylinders and cones. Not really much to say. And after that was done, it was time to create the bunny suit. Now, in the past, I've just projected a plane over the base mesh to create thin, tight clothing. But in this situation, it's a little different, since it's really important for the sculpted details to show through. So instead, I painted a mask on the base mesh and then used the Blender Extract tool. Now, I've never used this tool before, so I had some issues getting it to work. Whenever I tried to extract the mask, the resulting object had nothing in it, which really confused me. But eventually, I realized I just needed to apply the modifiers and shape keys. Now, after extracting the mesh, I smoothed out the edges since they were quite jagged. I then adjusted the thickness of the object, and with that, I had a nicely fitted suit. I then repeated the process for the neck, made some adjustments here and there, and the modeling after that was pretty much done. So here's a before and after of the model from before we rigged it and where we are now. And honestly, it's pretty night and day. I'm still surprised by how badly I did at the start. There's clearly something about the original reference that I struggled with. For some reason, I couldn't just copy what I saw. I don't know. Am I overthinking this? Let me know what you guys think. But with the modeling finally done, it was time to do the texturing. So to do the texturing, I started UV unwrapping the model. Now, in most other videos, people here would do the extremely tedious process of retopologizing the object before doing the UV unwrap. But I value my sanity, so I'm not doing that. So I unwrapped the objects and added some solid colors to the character. Once the basic colors had been added, I started on the eyes. Now, the reference image I was using was a little compressed, and the eyes weren't very clear. So I had some troubles trying to paint them. Though not too long later, I realized that the other reference sheet didn't have this issue, so I ended up just redoing the eyes. After painting the eye area, I started giving the head some line art using the inverse hull technique. Now you can see that this didn't work for the front hair. And the reason for this is when you add caps to a curved object, the cap doesn't actually connect to the main mesh. It just sort of floats on top of it. So since the hair is two separate parts, the solidify modifier doesn't work. So to fix this, you just need to convert the curve to a mesh and then merge the two parts together. So that's what I did. So after that, I started fleshing out the ear. Now, trying to sculpt details in the ear would have been annoying. So instead, I added some lines by using a skin modifier on an isolated edge. Now, another thing to point out is this ear doesn't connect to the head. But fortunately, that doesn't matter, since we're using flat colors and flat colors don't show seams. It's always good to keep this in mind since it can save you some time. For example, the character's hairline has a zigzag shape. So we could paint that, or we could not. Instead, we can just place down some lines, paint over it, and call it a day. But anyway, I added some extra lines to the hair, painted some shadows, and I was done. So with the head done, I started painting the body. Now originally, I thought this character would be easy to texture. You know, just some highlights here, a bit of gradients there, whatever these things are. Easy peasy. But there was something I completely overlooked. So when looking at this color, you can see a highlight on this side. Looks fine, right? Well, if we turn to face it head on, not so much anymore. And that was the issue. The character suit was really shiny and it had a lot of exaggerated sort of Fresnel to it. But I can't really paint that. So in case you don't know what Fresnel is, it's a physical property surfaces have where the more angled the surface is to your eye, the more light it reflects. Here's a picture of some mortar to demonstrate that. So to fix this, I would have needed to use a shader, and basic painting wouldn't have been enough. But I really didn't want to do that. It might seem lazy, but my initial vision for this project didn't involve messing around with a bunch of shaders. And I wasn't about to add an uncertain amount of time to the project scope, so I decided to just do the best I could and move on. Eventually, I started to paint the braces. Now, because of how the character was modeled, the bottom of the braces was showing instead of the top like in the reference image. I thought that I could just take the top color and put it to the bottom, but it looked terrible. So instead, I just added a couple of white lines to break up the shapes, and I left it at that. After finishing the jacket, I started adding the background. I added a large yellow plane for the background, and I added some smaller purple planes to create the radial pattern. To create the stars, I used a 5-point cone for the big one, and then I just used a subdivided plane for the smaller ones. So with the background done, I just rendered a scene, added a glare node from some extra spice, and I was done. And this is the final render. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the result. I had a hiccup here and there, but it still turned out alright. Something I'm not too happy with, though, is how long this project took. This project took me about 20 hours to do, which is definitely much faster than my previous projects, but still way too long. So I think I need to improve my sculpting speed, but I'll deal with that next time. So that's the video. Thanks for watching. Till next time.